Hi, everyone. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that my allergies are up. So thank you for your understanding if I sound a little funny or need a bit of tea here and there. What I want to talk about today feels really important because while codependency has been in our awareness for decades, narcissism is only now becoming visible. And not just in individuals, but in leadership, in systems, and across our entire world. I want to offer you a way of understanding them that isn't clinical, but is deeply spiritual. I've come to understand narcissism and codependency not as disorders, but as disoriented expressions of pure masculine and feminine energy. I see what a psychologist might consider to be a pathology as confused or off-course yin or yang energy. So I invite you to consider that as a concept with me. And before we explore how that shows up in our world today, I want to share two experiences I had, mystical experiences, that shaped how I see this so that it makes more sense to you. The first experience was in Egypt, and I was on a tour with about 300 psychics and healers, so you can imagine how elevated the energy was. And we were going down 3 ships on the Nile River. And I was sitting in my cabin and spontaneously went into what I would call a deep yin or feminine experience. In that experience, everything went dark, completely still, quiet, dark. Now, I want to be clear because we have as humans an association with darkness being evil, and that's not what I was experiencing. In fact, on another video on another day, we'll talk about how humans did this, came to associate darkness and evil and mush them together. That is not part of the universal experience. So in this very universal experience of consciousness, I have this beautiful sense of still, quiet energy that is deeply loving and holds all of the potential of creation, past, present, and future. It's very similar to what the ancient Chinese describe as yin. In that experience, and this is the distinguisher I'd like you to remember with me, I had a strong sense of all and what we might call other, right? Other beings, other potential, other life. But a very light sense of myself as a person. Now, when I got back from Egypt, as if consciousness really wanted me to get the distinctions, literally within weeks, I was in a workshop and went into an ecstatic yang experience. Some people would call this a kundalini experience. I want to make sure that we're aware. I think of this as a masculine energy, yang experience. And in this, I was pure white light, racing through time and space in an ecstatic love, a blissful expression. So while yin has almost no expression, and the love is more oriented toward, the closest word I can come up with is compassion or acceptance, yang energy is this blissful action-oriented energy. And it is generous. It wants to overflow and touch all that is around it. This, in contrast to the yin experience, I have a strong sense of self, but a very light sense of other. Now I want to share with you what happens when love is missing. Again, love in the yang or masculine experience is ecstatic, but there is also a love in the yin experience that is slower, more accepting, more compassionate of all that is. All right, love is there. But when love is missing, something else happens. The energy becomes disoriented, or we might even say distorted. Let's look at disoriented feminine first. In human expression, there is a minimal sense of self and a significant sense of others. Greater love for others, but more difficulty having love for self. And in that expression, we tend to make decisions for the benefit of others at the expense of oneself. All right, you're tracking with me? Let's move on to disoriented masculine. In human expression, it has a minimal sense of other, but a significant sense of self, often greater love for self, but less for other. And we tend to make decisions for the benefit of the self. And this is where the love is missing, even at the expense of another. Both narcissism and codependency are attempts to feel meaningful when we've lost connection to love. But where there is manipulation, there is disorientation, right? Simply, when love is missing, power becomes distorted. Excuse me, let me repeat that. When love is missing, power becomes distorted. And when it's distorted, we begin to manipulate in order to get our needs for love met. All right. I learned an aspect of manipulation from my native elders that I think you might find useful. And that was the concept of stealing power. It was the first time I'd ever been introduced to that concept, and it made a huge difference in my personal development, and I'm hoping it might be useful for you. Excuse me. All right. Stealing power, the way that I would describe it, is gaining personal power by taking energy from another. The key word there is taking energy. Receiving energy is healthy. Taking energy is harmful. And it can be sneaky. So let's look at how this happens. In a codependent or yin disorientation, we're prone to these kinds of behaviors, to rescuing, to micromanaging others, not allowing someone to learn from their mistakes, fixing them so that we'll feel better, and so that we will feel the power of our influence. We tend to over-empathize, making their problem and feelings ours. And I want to share a little story that gives you an idea about how sneaky it can be. I was in a woman's circle, and I was sharing my story, and it was painful. And I was crying, and I was getting to a place of catharsis about what I had been experiencing, saying out loud what had been stored inside for a really, really long time. And a woman in the group identified so deeply with my story, she literally got up out of the circle, came over to me, folded up in my lap, and was sobbing. I stopped sharing. I stopped crying. I stopped releasing the pain to hold her. Now, I'm not blaming her. I'm not blaming myself. That's the dynamic, right? We so identify with another's pain and story that we can even recognize it as our own or make it our own. And once we do that, once we stop being the observer, the loving, compassionate observer of another's story, it's a form of stealing power. Okay? Often very intuitive, sensitive individuals intuit the truth before others reason it out. This is another quality that's a part of how we see the world. So we can get frustrated with people who seem slow to us, Or more commonly, what I see amongst highly intuitive women deep in their feminine energy, we start to doubt ourselves because we can't prove what we intuitively sense. Logic has been held up as greater than intuition for a long time. So now we're sensing life deeply. We're sensing others' needs before they do. And we expect others to be the same, right? To be as intuitive as we are. That's how it works. We think the rest of the world does or should see life the way that we do. And people should intuitively know what we need or we want. And when they don't, and they don't deliver to us the way we deliver to others, we resent them when someone doesn't see what we need and support us. So resenting someone for being who they are and not being there for us is another form of stealing power. The resentment itself becomes a way that we feel justified or vindicated in our indignation. And in that, we've stolen power. I hope this is making some sense. Let me know in the comments below if it is or it isn't, and I'll come back and do another video and make sure that these concepts are making sense, because they're powerful in your life when you understand how they play out. All right, let's take a look at narcissistic manipulation, yang disorientation. In the yang field, one has to be right no matter what. And because we have to be right at all costs, we will project our poor choices onto other people, criticizing them, smearing them, under-empathizing with them. We tend to need to have an enemy. And that's a way of avoiding looking at the wounded parts of ourselves. We're mapping that enemy onto others. We expect others to admire us when we're in that yang disorientation, no matter what. And we resent them when they aren't admiring us. That yang energy in disoriented state tends to exaggerate or even lie in order to save face and to be right at all costs. I have a story from my own life as a child where I went into this yang disorientation, and I've needed to do a lot of healing work around this. In fact, both the stories I've shared about disorientation, I've gotten to do some beautiful inner work with. So, as a child at that time, I was deeply emotionally wounded. I felt unseen, as you can imagine, being the oldest of 6 kids. I felt pretty unseen. And I was, as many children feel when we're young, kind of like an odd duck. And I wanted to be popular. But I felt so insecure about myself. So I had brought something to share with the class, as many of us had. Kind of a show and tell for slightly older kids. And it was important to me to make sure they knew that what I was sharing was the best out of everything that had been shared. And I exaggerated to make my point. And the exaggeration was not entirely true. That's disoriented yang, or masculine energy. In that energy, we are trying to be seen, heard, witnessed, appreciated, adored, right? And that's okay with us when it's at the cost of others, or even our integrity. Ooh, ouch, huh? So compassion in this state is often seen as a weakness because you lose your superiority in compassion. Compassion makes you vulnerable. So in this disorientation, we often accuse others, and often innocents, of what we ourselves have done wrong, or we blame an innocent person for our own wrongdoing. Disoriented masculine. In this state, I have to be right and in charge in order to be safe. This energy expects obedience, even if that obedience is harmful to those who are expected to comply. And we see these disoriented energies play out in our families, our churches, our spiritual groups, our inner worlds, our past lives, our childhoods, and in politics. And on a global scale, we are watching these two energies trying to find their way back to love. Right now, we're witnessing a dramatic increase in disoriented masculine energy in leadership. That's another video we'll go into more deeply, but I do want to give you some hints about this that may help you in your own spiritual work and meditations. This energy that is disconnected from its origin, which is love, is peaking right now because, as I learned from my Cherokee elders, we're completing a 25,000-year cycle of masculine or yang energy exploration and entering a 25,000-year cycle of feminine or yin energy exploration. Now, ideally, we discover how to maintain balanced perspective with just a slight yin orientation that allows us to become more compassionate and intuitive with each other. I know that some of us who are highly sensitive might not be following world events closely. For many of us that are sensitive, all the disoriented masculine energy right now can feel overwhelming. And at the same time, I want to offer you a perspective. There are some patterns in leadership that are impacting our world. And before I share a real world example of this, I want to invite you to stay present to yourself. If anything I say feels activating, come back to your breath, please. Remember, you're safe right now. I'm not offering this to overwhelm you, but it can be helpful and healing to understand how these energies are playing out in our world today so that we can discover our deeper role in restoring the balance as we're going into our inner worlds. There is a specific quality of love that is missing. Okay, more about that in a minute. So whether you agree with the current political leaders in your country or not, what matters from a spiritual point of view, from certainly what I've been shown, it's the pattern that we want to notice. The use of fear and overwhelming force to create control. Remember, control is a way to try to get the obedience of others so that I can feel safe, which is an indication of disoriented or wounded masculine. Recently, President Trump threatened extreme escalation against the people of Iran. And this is where we want to look at the pattern. It's a pattern that has shown up repeatedly throughout history. Extreme threat is energy coming from disoriented masculine. It's rooted in fear, in domination, and control. And we tend to have reactions to threats like this. If you're super highly sensitive, you don't even have to know what's going on in the news to start feeling your reaction. You might notice how you're feeling right now. Is there fear or anger or desire to turn away? All of those are natural reactions to a threat. And what we can choose to cultivate is a conscious response rather than a reaction. A natural reaction is an attempt to minimize the power of the threat. So here's one way that could happen. Some of you may have heard his statement and thought, oh, he's just exaggerating again. He's using the biggest bargaining chip he can possibly think of, even annihilation of an entire group of people. He'll never actually do this. Though it can be useful to remember that when someone is acting out in their disoriented masculine, historically, many of those leaders do act on their threats. So it might not be entirely useful to dismiss someone in their aggressive stance. We're probably going to want to do that, however, if we grew up in a family where that kind of extreme exaggeration was used to manipulate you or other family members, or maybe it went beyond exaggeration and into actual extreme punishment or abuse to try to force obedience. When that happens, a part of us relates to abusive language, positioning, even the actual abuse. Sometimes we react as though it's normal, or just how things are, or that's just how leadership does things, right? We need a certain amount of narcissism in leadership. I've heard that one, right? We're normalizing it because we don't yet have a clear orientation to balanced yin or yang leadership. And our own trauma triggers flare up. We go into fight. We freeze. We don't know what to do. We fawn. Oh, it's not as bad as they're making it sound like it is. Or we flee. Just let me the heck out of here. And what's happening is that his trauma is playing out, and with him, it can activate ours. So, what can we as conscious people do? How do we transform reaction into conscious response? Well, the first thing to do is what you're doing right now. Recognize the pattern and its origin. Remember when we started recognizing the patterns of codependence? We started talking about what was happening in our family dynamics. So we could recognize it. Now we're looking at the pattern of narcissism and our global family dynamics. What's happening with our global family, where masculine energy has been disconnected from love? That's the first. Notice the pattern. Second, activate the missing love. Embody the quality of love that is needed, and the quality that is needed honors and respects others. Honors and respects others and ourselves. Particularly, though, when we're healing the narcissistic disorientation, honors and respects others in compassion, even in their woundedness. That's a video for another day because it's a tall order. We can start, however, by seeing that place within ourselves that feels dishonored and respected, and love that, and let that extend out to others. So, let me put this really simply, something you can do right now to maintain your balance and centering as the world struggles to find its collective heart, which is compassion. Hold yourself in compassion, especially when you find yourself going into trauma response, right? Fight, freeze, fawn, flee. These are natural responses to trauma. So I like to hold myself first, and that was the way I was taught by my elders. You first. The compassion to feel my own childhood fears peel away. Those moments when I felt betrayed, as though I didn't matter. I wasn't being respected. Hold that. I hold that first and let them rest in the love of compassion. Then, when I'm ready, I go out and take that love into leadership. And especially if their soul permits. Otherwise, it can feel abusive. So if their soul permits, holding them in compassion, people of the world, the planet. It's good to pace yourself. Find compassion for whatever you feel ready to hold and don't push it. Staying in the compassion is key. And know that as you're deepening into this compassion, this honor and respect for you, for others, that you're making a contribution to life in balance with its true love-based feminine, masculine balance. And to help you with that, I created the holding meditation, which takes you into that sacred womb of creation, that blessed place where all life begins. And be able to sink into that yin energy, that compassionate love that heals all wounds. And it holds all of our potential too, including the potential for peaceful resolution. That is an energy all of us, including our leaders, can benefit from. And there's a link down below for a free download. As the world struggles to find its balance, we come back to this. When love is missing, power becomes distorted. And the work of a conscious person is not to fight that distortion, but to restore love within herself first. Because that is how we restore the world. Remember to subscribe and follow for more, and know that with all my heart, I love you. Thank you for the sacred work you're doing in the world today.